When I started learning Avid FX, I often had the feeling that keyframes had a mind of their own. Gradually, as I became more proficient, I developed a workflow in which I was able to take control over keyframes and produce predictable results. In this tutorial, I'm going to show you the logical workflow that I use to create keyframes in Avid FX in such a way that I have precise control over their behavior. This is the actual effect that I'm going to walk you through. If you'd like to follow along as I work my way through the tutorial, you should set up a timeline in MC and put a 7-second long clip on the timeline. Then, in the Effect palette, go to Avid FX and on the right, grab the Avid FX filter button and drag it down onto the video track. Now, open the Effect editor and launch Avid FX. By default, Avid FX opens with 2 tracks on the timeline. I only need one of them, so I'll select the lower track and press delete on the keyboard. Before I create the effect, I'm going to check some of the settings in Avid FX. The first one is this key here. It's called the toggle animate static mode, but nowadays more and more people refer to it as the record mode. If the key has a grey background like it has now, it's in the static mode. If I click on it, you'll see that the background changes to red, and this is known as either animate or record mode. When you're in the record mode, any changes to your composition will result in the automatic creation of keyframes. And it's probably this button which causes many people, like myself, to believe that keyframes have a mind of their own. In order to use my logical train of thoughts when I create keyframes, it's important that I have complete control over them, so I must have this button switched off. Next, I want to take a look at the keyframe palette. The keyframe palette is found in the Options tab. However, by default, Avid FX opens without any Options tab on the user interface. So let me quickly remove this so we can see the default view. Now I prefer having the Options tab alongside the Timeline tab, and to do that I must make sure the timeline window is active. In other words, it should have a thin yellow frame around it. If I click up here on the Controls panel, you'll see that the yellow frame moves to the Control panel, showing that it's active. So I need the timeline active. Then I go up to Window and down to Show Keyframe Palette. When I click on that, the Options tab will appear here, and it will already be open on the Keyframe Palette. The first setting, Default Interpolation, only applies when you're in the Animate Record mode. I'm going to be working in the Static mode, so this doesn't really apply. However, I'm always wary of having constant set anywhere as a default. I prefer to have it either as linear or hold. I'll choose linear this time. I'm not going to be using toggle interpolation in this tutorial, so again, it's not really important what the setting is. But here again, I'm always careful to change it to something else other than constant. Keep keyframe time should be deselected. Likewise, I prefer to work with hold value start end deselected. With those changes to the settings, we can go back to the timeline. This track with the right pointing triangle is known as a shape track, and you can look on this as a form of master track. If you twirl down the triangle, you can see that there are more tracks nested inside, and some of those can also be twirled down in even further. To keep things simple, I'm going to be working mainly at the shape track level. With the shape track deselected, if you're not sure if it's selected or not, Go down and click on the grey area. This will deselect the track. Then go up to this button, which is called the Add Vector Text button, and click. A new shape track called Text is created, and it's already twirled down and the text track is selected. At the same time, up here, the text input window opened. Now I enter the text into the window. And I'll twirl up the text shape track. Then I'll go up here and click on Controls. I'll be working with the Position tab, and here you can see many of the parameters that I'll be adjusting. The grey box to the left is the box where you set the interpolation. I'll also be working on the Shadow tab. I go down to the timeline and select the first keyframe. The effect is going to begin with the title scaled down to 30%. The title is going to be down here, just out of the picture, and it's going to have a drop shadow. It's easier to set up a drop shadow when you can actually see it, so I'm going to start by setting the drop shadow. I begin by switching on the shadow, and I want the drop shadow at the first keyframe to be 0. Click on 20 and enter 0. When I do that, an interpolation symbol appears here, and if I click, I can see this is the dreaded constant. I don't want the drop shadow to be constant from the first keyframe. I want it to move in a linear fashion. Now I can go to the Position tab, and here's where the logic starts to come in. I want the title to start at 30%, go down to Scale, click on 100, change the value to 30, enter. Both scale X and Y will change together as long as you have these links on the chain connected. Once again, the interpolation was set to constant. I want it to be linear. The next setting applies to the Y position. I want the text to be down off screen. This time I'll do it by clicking on the number and holding down my mouse button and then dragging till it's just off screen. Once again, we have a constant value here, and we need to change it to linear. At the same time as the title moves up into place, I want it to tumble 360 degrees. So I go down to the tumble value. It should start at 0, and I want to have the interpolation set to linear. The next keyframe is going to be set at 2 seconds. Now if I take the CTI here, the current time indicator, and scrub back and forwards with it, you can see over there that the counter is going, and this counter is showing the position of the CTI. I prefer inputting the timecode directly here instead of scrubbing to try and find the place. Click, and 2 seconds will be 2 seconds 00 frames. 200. Enter. So that's the first part of the logical approach. Move your CTI to the next position. The next move is to create a keyframe. All too often people start adjusting their parameters when they've moved the CTI. Make sure you create the keyframe first so that you are actually changing parameters on the new keyframe. Control N will give me a new keyframe. Now I can begin making adjustments to the new keyframe. At this point, I want the scale to be 100%. Click 100, enter. From there on, I don't want the scale to change, so I change the interpolation now to hold, not constant. Towards the end of this tutorial I'll show you why I try to avoid using constant. When it gets to this point, I also want it to have tumbled 360 degrees. 360 degrees is the same as 1 revolution. Click here on 0 and enter 1. When the tumble gets to this position, I also want it to hold. I want to center the text. Until recently, I always centered text by manually entering the values 960 and 540. But just a few days ago, somebody very kindly pointed out that this little icon over here can do wonders. If I click here, it will automatically center the text window. One more thing, the drop shadow. Go to the drop shadow tab. I had set the distance as 0. But as the text moves up and forwards, I want the drop shadow to give the appearance of the text getting further away from the screen. So I grab distance and begin to drag the drop shadow till about there, I think. And from here it should be on hold. It's advisable to scrub back and forwards from time to time just to check things are working as you want. In fact, you can also preview your effect in MC on your client monitor. It probably won't play back in real time. That will depend on how complex the effect is and also how powerful your computer is. But to do that, you would click on Apply. Then back here in MC, take care that you don't actually click anywhere on the screen. It's important that the effect editor window is open when you try the playback. To move things around the screen, you will have to use your keyboard. First, press Home. Then press L or spacebar to play, and you can watch the effect. It's a blue dot effect, but you can actually play it back like this without rendering. And if you're happy with the results, launch Avid FX again. So we're back here. From this keyframe, I want everything to hold for 1 second. So the logical train of thoughts is, move the CTI 1 second. Click on time. Now it will be 300. Enter. Control N and make a keyframe. If you want to set any new parameter values here, you should do it. I don't want anything to have changed by the time it reaches here. If you look at the interpolation box, it should be blank now. If I go to position, from here, position X and scale and spin Y are going to change. So I need to set the interpolation for those. Position X is now going to be linear. Scale, linear. Spin Y, linear. The changes will take place over 1 second, 15 frames. Click on the time input. 1:15 plus 3 is 4:15. Enter. Make a keyframe, Control N. I'll start with spin Y, grab the arm here and start to spin it something like there, yeah. I'm going to increase the scale. I want to spin it a little more. Oops, too much. There. Scale up again. Maybe there. And move position X so K is just inside the picture. Like that. Then I want position Y to hold. I want the scale to hold. And I want the spin to hold for 1 second. Click on the time input. 4:15 plus 1 is 5:15. enter, new keyframe, Control N. And from here to the end, I want the X position to change linearly, and I want the scale to change linearly, and the drop shadow to change linearly. Go to the end keyframe. By the time I get to the end keyframe, the shadow should be 0. Although it's not important because it is the last keyframe, I'll change this to hold. Go to position. I want the scale to be back at 30% when it reaches the last keyframe. And I'll change this to hold as well. And finally, the X position is going to be over there, just out of the picture. And change this to hold. And with that, I have finished creating the effect by working methodically and logically with the keyframes. I'll do a quick scrub here. Coming in like that, then angling after a pause. Pause, and then disappear off the picture. Yep, that would seem to be finished. Before I go to apply this and show you the final result, I'd like to take time and show you two other things. The first of them is, why do I take care not to confuse constant with hold? To show you, I'm going to resize the timeline window. And I'm going to twirl down in the text shape track and twirl down in the transformations track and twirl down in the position track. Up here you can see the master keyframes, and below the master keyframes are the individual keyframes for the parameters I changed. Now I'm going to go down here and select scale X. Then I'm going to go to this symbol here, which is a symbol of a graph, and click on it, and this graph of the keyframes appears. Now you don't have to do this. This is only to illustrate why I try to avoid constant. For example, on this second last keyframe, I might have wanted it to hold rather than linearly go down to 0. So in the interpolation for this keyframe, I might get confused and think that constant means it will hold that value for the remainder of the timeline. Watch what happens if I click on constant. The whole timeline changed to the same value, no keyframes, nothing. Now you don't have to panic if this happens to you. Hold down Control and press Z and you can get back there again. If I had chosen hold, you'll see that it only affects the timeline from the keyframe and forwards. So let's put this back to where we had it before and leave the graph view. And the final thing I'd like to show you is, if I scrub through the timeline, you can see that when the title tumbles into place, it reaches the full tumble at exactly the same time as the scale is at 100% and the text is centered. If I had wanted the tumble to be complete before the text had reached the center and was at 100%, I could do this. Select the tumble parameter, grab the keyframe and drag it along to the left. So the tumble is finished here, but the title still has to move up into position. So using the logical setting of keyframes, it's then very easy to come in here at this lower level and make individual adjustments to the parameters. Now we're ready to apply things. Back here in MC, render. The rendering can go quickly. I'm lucky I have a special microwave, so I'll throw everything in the microwave. And now we're finished and we can just check that everything did work correctly. So there you are. Keyframes don't have to have a mind of their own if you just take your time and work methodically and logically with them. That's all for this one. Bye for now.